Saturn's rings shouldn't exist, and the only reason they do is because something got too close. That's not a metaphor, that's physics. A moon wandered inside a boundary it couldn't see, and Saturn did what Saturn always does. It converted that moon into debris. The rings are the residue. The rings you have spent your whole life admiring are what's left. And here's the part nobody says out loud. The boundary that destroyed that moon is still there. It hasn't moved, it doesn't negotiate. Every object in Saturn's orbit, every moon, every ring particle, every spacecraft we've ever sent is either outside that line right now, or it's already gone. This is not a planet with violent features. This is a machine, and once you see how it actually works, you cannot unsee it. Start with what you think you know. The rings look stable. From Earth, every photograph, every rendering, every image pulled from a telescope, they appear solid. Permanent bands of pale gold suspended in perfect equilibrium around the planet. Peaceful, almost architectural. That assumption is wrong, and the correction changes everything. Those rings are not solid. They are a continuous, planet-scale collision event. Billions of icy shards slam into each other at thousands of kilometers per hour. Every collision sends fragments screaming outward, grinding endlessly into dust, reforming, and shattering again. There is no stillness in those rings. There has never been. They stretch 300,000 kilometers from edge to edge. In some places, they are 10 meters thick. Scale that to the size of a football field and the rings would be thinner than a sheet of paper. A blade, not a halo, perpetually grinding itself thinner, year by year, with no endpoint and no pause. But here is where it compounds. Those rings are too clean, too bright, too reflective to be billions of years old. Cosmic dust darkens everything over time. It should have dimmed the rings long ago. Instead, they look almost new, which means they are almost new. Something massive was destroyed recently, in cosmic terms, and we are living in the brief window after the destruction, before the evidence fully disappears. The leading scientific model points to a catastrophe. A moon, possibly as large as Titan, drifted past a threshold called the Roche limit. This is the point where Saturn's tidal forces exceed the gravity holding a body together. The moon did not fall in. Saturn did not need to pull it. It simply came close enough, and then the math took over. The crust separated from the core, the interior scattered across hundreds of thousands of kilometers of orbit. The fragments we call rings today are what remains of a world that ceased to exist. Think about what that means. A moon, comparable in size to the largest moon in Saturn's current system, simply approached and was dismantled. Not by an explosion, not by a collision with another object, by proximity alone. But the assumption was, the rings are ancient and stable. The correction is, they are young, temporary, and they exist because Saturn converted a moon into them. The implication compounds further. Whatever created those rings is not a past event. The Roche limit is a permanent feature of Saturn's gravity. It applies right now to every object in its orbit. Any moon that drifts close enough will end the same way. The process is not over, it is ongoing, it is waiting. And the rings themselves are already being reclaimed. Scientists call it ring rain. Charged particles from the rings are being pulled by Saturn's magnetic field and falling into the upper atmosphere at a rate of several tons per second. The rings are not just a record of past destruction. They are actively disappearing back into the planet that created them. What took a catastrophe to build, gravity is quietly undoing, one particle at a time, every second of every day. Saturn did not become violent. It has always been violent. We just needed to look at the rings long enough to understand what they are. The rings show what happens when objects drift too close, but inside the atmosphere, the true engine of Saturn's violence is running, and it never rests. You might assume that Saturn's atmosphere, visible, photographed, studied for decades, is well understood, that we know its limits. That assumption breaks the moment you look past the surface. The upper cloud layers move at 1,800 kilometers per hour. That is nearly 5 times the fastest wind ever recorded on Earth, and it is not a storm. It is the baseline, the permanent condition. The wind does not slow down between events because there are no events, only degrees of intensity. Go deeper, and the pressure starts climbing. The temperature climbs, the chemistry changes, the layers compress into states of matter that don't have simple names. Saturn is not a planet with a surface you can land on. It is a gradient of increasing hostility with no floor, just conditions becoming more extreme until the concept of surviving stops applying entirely. At sufficient depth, the hydrogen itself becomes metallic, conducting electricity like a wire, spinning with the planet and generating a magnetic field that stretches millions of kilometers into space. That magnetic field is not a passive feature. It traps high-energy particles from the sun, accelerates them, and creates radiation belts around Saturn intense enough to damage spacecraft electronics over time. The space around Saturn is not empty. It is a hostile environment that begins long before you reach the planet itself. The violence does not start at the cloud tops. It starts far earlier than that. But the upper atmosphere reveals something that should not be there at all. At Saturn's north pole, there is a hexagon, a 6-sided, geometrically precise storm. Each side is longer than the diameter of Earth. It rotates continuously. It is not a temporary pattern. It is a permanent structure. It was there when Voyager flew past in 1981. It was there when Cassini arrived in 2004. It is there now, unchanged. The assumption: fluid dynamics produces circles and spirals, gas moves in curved paths. A hexagon in a planetary atmosphere violates basic expectations of how gas behaves. The correction: a standing wave pattern, a resonance between different wind speeds at different latitudes, can lock a shape into place. The hexagon is not a coincidence. It is a solution the atmosphere found and has refused to leave. It has been holding that shape, rotating in place, for longer than we have been able to observe it. The implication: at the center of that hexagon sits a cyclone wider than 2 Earths, not a feature inside the storm, but the anchor point that holds the entire structure in place. It has been rotating for as long as we've been able to watch. There is no sign it will stop. The storm does not have a beginning we can identify, and it does not appear to have an end approaching. But the hexagon is not Saturn's maximum output. It is the baseline. Every 30 Earth years, once per Saturnian year, a different process begins. Scientists call it the Great White Spot, and the name does not prepare you for the scale. This is not a regional storm. It is a storm system that wraps entirely around the planet's circumference. From inside the atmosphere, it dredges up ammonia ice from deep in the interior and turns the golden planet white. It produces lightning, confirmed and measured by multiple spacecraft, with approximately 10,000 times the energy output of anything in Earth's atmosphere. These are not lightning strikes as we understand them. They are planetary-scale electrical discharges, visible from space, audible as radio bursts that travel across the solar system. It changes Saturn's appearance from space, an entire planet visibly altered by a storm. And it is not a malfunction. It is scheduled. It happens every Saturnian year, with the regularity of a biological cycle, because the energy building in the interior has nowhere else to go. The Great White Spot is not a disruption of the normal state. It is the normal state releasing pressure, which means the calm bands of amber clouds you see between events are not calm. They are storage. Saturn is not occasionally violent. It is continuously accumulating energy and periodically converting that accumulation into planet-scale events. The atmosphere is not the feature, it is the delivery mechanism. Storms and winds shape the planet, but the moons reveal what happens when gravity gets personal. Saturn has more than 140 moons. That number is not a point of wonder. It is evidence of a gravitational field so dominant that it has captured, shaped, and in at least one case, entirely destroyed everything within its reach. 2 moons show you what Saturn's influence actually does. Titan is the largest. It has an atmosphere thicker than Earth's, with cloud systems, rainfall, rivers, and lakes. The photographs look genuinely familiar. The assumption is that familiar means safe. That assumption is precisely wrong. The temperature is 179 degrees below 0 Celsius. The rain is liquid methane. The lakes are filled with hydrocarbons cold enough to make steel brittle. The dunes are static charged organ grains, hundreds of meters high, shifted by winds in an atmosphere that would kill a human being in seconds through cold and chemistry simultaneously. The surface is carved by rivers that flow, flood, and carve channels exactly as water does on Earth, but the liquid is natural gas. The process looks identical, the inputs are lethal. Titan mimics the structure of habitability while being built entirely from the materials of death. Every feature that suggests a livable world is composed of the wrong chemistry, and it is that way because Saturn shaped it that way over billions of years of gravitational influence, atmospheric interaction, and tidal stress. It orbits Saturn, it was built by Saturn, its atmosphere, its weather cycle, its surface chemistry are all products of a system that has already demonstrated what it does to objects that cross the wrong boundary. Then there is Enceladus, small, 500 kilometers across. It should be an inert, frozen rock with nothing to tell us. Instead, at its south pole, there are fractures in the ice, long, parallel gashes that researchers called tiger stripes when they first identified them, and from those fractures, Enceladus is venting into space. Geysers of water vapor and ice particles, hundreds of kilometers tall, shooting into the vacuum at supersonic velocity. Not a geological event that happened once, a continuous, ongoing process that has been running for an unknown length of time. The assumption: a moon that small, that far from the sun, should be frozen solid. No internal heat source, no liquid water, no activity. The correction: Saturn's gravity doesn't just hold Enceladus in orbit, it squeezes it. The tidal forces, the same family of forces that dismantled the moon that became the rings, flex Enceladus's interior constantly, generating heat through friction. That heat keeps the interior from freezing. That heat maintains a liquid ocean beneath the ice. Beneath the ice shell, there is a global ocean. Liquid water. Salt water, confirmed when Cassini flew directly through the plumes and analyzed the particles in real time, with organic molecules, with hydrothermal activity at the sea floor, where water contacts rock at elevated temperatures. The implication: those conditions, liquid water, heat, organics, and mineral contact, are precisely the conditions under which life exists in Earth's deep ocean, far from sunlight, in total pressure and darkness. We have found those environments on Earth and found them full of life. Something may be alive inside Enceladus, not complex, not visible, but chemistry is organized in the specific pattern we associate with biology. And if it is alive because Saturn never lets Enceladus rest. The same gravity that killed one moon is sustaining another moon's ocean. That is worth pausing on. In 2017, Cassini detected molecular hydrogen in the plumes of Enceladus. On Earth, molecular hydrogen at hydrothermal vents is produced by a chemical reaction between water and rock at high temperatures, and it is one of the primary energy sources that microbial life uses in the deep ocean. Its presence in those plumes is not proof of life, but it is evidence that the chemistry required to support life is actively occurring inside Enceladus right now. Saturn's violence, applied to a small frozen moon, may have created the most promising environment for extraterrestrial life in the entire solar system. This is the mechanical truth of Saturn. It does not distinguish between destroying and sustaining. It applies force. The outcome depends entirely on the geometry of the object receiving it. Saturn shapes and kneads its moons with invisible hands, and yet, the one machine we sent to study it could not escape the same fate. The assumption behind the Cassini mission: we could send something to Saturn, study it for years, and bring the knowledge back safely. That assumption held for 13 years. Cassini launched in 1997. It arrived at Saturn in 2004 and spent over a decade making every major discovery discussed in this video. The plumes of Enceladus, the methane lakes of Titan, the youth and origin of the rings, the permanence of the hexagon. It was one of the most scientifically productive planetary missions ever executed. By 2017, the fuel was almost gone, and here is where the correction arrived. In its final months, Cassini executed what mission controllers called the grand finale. 22 orbits threading through the gap between Saturn and its innermost ring, closer to the planet than any spacecraft had ever gone. Each pass brought it into a region where the radiation was intense, the ring particles were a collision risk, and the gravitational forces were measurably stronger. The team accepted those risks because there was no time left for caution. Every orbit was a data opportunity they would not get again. They flew Cassini into the most dangerous part of the Saturnian system and extracted as much as they could before the end became unavoidable. If Cassini drifted uncontrolled, it risked contaminating Enceladus, potentially destroying the scientific value of the one place in the solar system most likely to harbor life. There was one remaining option: aim it at Saturn instead. They programmed it to transmit data until the signal was cut out. On September 15, 2017, it entered the atmosphere. The heat built in seconds, the pressure climbed, Cassini began to tumble. The same atmosphere it had orbited for 13 years was now tearing at its structure, pulling at its antenna, overwhelming its thermal protection. The signal lasted less than a minute after atmospheric entry. Then it was gone. Not destroyed by a malfunction, not lost to a navigation error, deliberately sent into a planet that processed it the same way it processes everything else, with physics, without distinction, without acknowledgement. Cassini's atoms are part of Saturn now, the spacecraft that told us more about that planet than any other instrument in human history became material in the atmosphere it spent its life studying. It crossed the boundary, and the boundary did what it always does. The implication is precise. There is no safe distance from which to understand Saturn without eventually becoming subject to the same forces you are studying. The mission did not end despite its success. It ended because of what success required. Getting close enough to learn, and close enough meaning eventually, irreversibly, inside the boundary. Saturn does not reward proximity, it converts it. So here is what actually connects all of it. Not storms, not scale, not even the rings. The real bottleneck is this: Saturn's gravity does not have a minimum threshold for consequence. It operates on everything within its reach, at every moment, without adjustment for size or significance. A grain of ice and a moon the size of a continent and a multi-billion-dollar spacecraft followed the same math. Cross a certain distance, and the outcome is no longer a question. It is already determined. That reframes everything in this video. The rings are not a feature, they are what happens when something crosses that line. The hexagon is not an anomaly, it is what the atmosphere looks like when it has been running an uninterrupted process for centuries with nothing able to stop it. Enceladus is not a curiosity, it is a moon being continuously processed by Saturn's tidal forces, and the byproduct of that processing is a possible ocean of life. Cassini is not a tragedy, it is a data point. Even a deliberately controlled approach ends in absorption. And the rings themselves, the very feature that makes Saturn recognizable, that made every human who ever pointed a telescope at the sky stop and look again, are dying. Saturn's gravity is pulling them inward, slowly, as ring rain descending into the atmosphere. In 100 million years, they will be gone. In cosmic terms, that is soon. We exist in the specific, narrow window of Saturn's 4.5 billion year history when the rings are present and visible. Before this window, they weren't there. After it, they won't be. Right now, at this moment, they are here because the destruction that created them happened recently enough that they haven't finished falling back in yet. We arrived just in time to see the evidence before it disappeared. But here is what that actually means. We did not discover Saturn, we caught it mid-process. The rings are mid-collapse, the moons are mid-compression, the atmosphere is mid-cycle, Cassini is mid-absorption. Every single thing we observed is a frame in a sequence that started long before us and will continue long after us, indifferent to the fact that we were watching. Consider what that timeline actually looks like. Saturn formed approximately 4.5 billion years ago. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. We have been pointing instruments at Saturn for less than 400 years. The window in which we observe those rings spans less than a single breath compared to the life of the planet. We are not studying Saturn, we are momentarily adjacent to it. A brief flash of attention from a species that appeared recently and will not last forever, aimed at a process that has no concern for either our arrival or our eventual disappearance. Saturn does not perform for observers, it does not pause, it does not acknowledge the instruments we sent or the conclusions we drew. It continues. That is all it does. It continues. Saturn's violence is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It just runs, continuously, on everything within reach. Everything within reach eventually becomes part of the machine. No negotiation, no mercy, and we are only observers, briefly looking, before the process continues. Gravity doesn't negotiate. It just waits.